let's continue.
Okay.
Vienna, Austria. Again, it's evening here already, a little bit late. And I recognize we're probably having a different agile in different parts of the world. It's quite interesting. If I look at across Europe, Europe is not as aligned as America might be. So we have many different flavors of agile. It's different to be in Germany than being in the UK or in France or in the Scandinavians. All have different cultural backgrounds, also in their companies, and that's what we see when we look after agile. And same for America. Probably I recognize when I attend coach camps or alike. A little bit about me. What is quite interesting, I came to this, again, this is not really professional slides. If you can't read it, just ask. It's basically notes, and I just wanted to put it in here. Came to this term stereotype agilist. So what do I mean by this? Started before the Agile Manifesto, 90s. So I think that's a very common theme for the older guys amongst us. Started in the XP area, in a very traditional environment, Daimler Chrysler at this time, but it was not the famous C3 project, was in Germany. Yeah, and then moved on more and more into this space because I really believed in it. It was these days where there was no dogma out there. It was not so much. You were rather outliers when you were going for agile, which was not called agile these days, but looking for alternatives. And so there was also no question out there to ask anyone, is it agile what we're doing? There was only the question, does it make sense what we're doing? Or would it make more sense to do something else? And that was quite helpful, I think, as far as I remember. Yeah, 2 years later, 2001, we know, Agile Manifesto. I think that's a big date, actually, next year, 20 years Agile. So there's something why I want to put some ideas here at the table. I moved more and more into the space, then became independent, founded a company on my own, working as a consultant coach. We can talk about this, trainer. So again, fits well with the stereotype, doing all these things. And we'll come a little bit to this agile industrial complex, which is an interesting term. And I copied it from Dan Metzik, who is here. And I might admit that I'm part of this, right? I'm earning my living from it, or I've been earning it since quite a while. And I'm probably not always from the same stance as I've been doing since recently. A couple of terms which I'm pretty much attached to these days, a lot about agility. So agility is something I'm looking more into more than agile since quite a long time, because I feel like, agile is something we know what it is, but it feels very dogmatic at some point to me, versus agility is something which is more like a capacity, a competence, especially of an organization, which is holding more than just looking after a few value pairs and principles. And I sometimes compare it when I talk to my clients with, some young kids might show up with new Adidas or Nike dress on and say, hey, look at my new dress, my fresh dress, it's agile. And then they need to run across the block 10, 20, 50 times. Now we can talk about agility. Both is right. I mean, it's okay to have a nice dress, to have, feel proud about it, it fits well, it serves its need, but it's maybe not enough. And agility is something where we might even say, well, it's not about bad or, right or wrong. It might just be the capacity for more elasticity under certain conditions. And so that's where leadership agility comes in for me. Again, recognize the notion leadership agility, which is a little bit different than agile leadership. Also, I'm, since quite a while now, and I just finished one milestone here, an ORS practitioner. So for those who don't know it, and hopefully there are some of you here, this organizations and relationship systems coaching becomes quite popular nowadays in the agile space, and it's a very, very useful program. I'll talk a little bit about it and pull a little bit of it in. And I'm very much attached to communities. I remember 9 years ago, I co-founded the Agile Europe network which was a little bit in comparison to the Agile Alliance, where we said, we don't have this alignment in Europe, but still so many practitioners, what could we do to get closer to each other? And that was a totally self-organized initiative, which led into a conference, an unconference, which was done by enthusiasts, and has been happening every year since then. Again, by volunteers, no professional company behind. And it's a really huge network on LinkedIn. And so these are the topics around me, and it shouldn't be about me, it should be about us here. So that's maybe the title is wrong. Here are a few connections on my social media accounts, Michael_Leber and Michael Leber on LinkedIn. So if you want to get connected, I'm happy to continue the conversation anywhere there or also in other places. Now here, start again. So if you look at this picture, which doesn't look nice, right? This might trigger a lot of emotions inside yourself. And different people will be probably triggered in different ways. So if you come to this accident here, you might respond or react in different ways. Somebody, for example, might say, hey, I need to immediately call the emergency, right? Or another one might show up and say, hey, I know what to do, and start, working on the wound, just trying to get the blood stopping and from bleeding and everything. And another person might just show up and say, hey, okay, the wound is gratefully not so bad, and might just embrace this little boy and just hug him. Different reactions, different responses in the same situation, depending probably upon where we are coming from. And what I'm trying to talk about here is, let's say, awareness in front of a challenge, in front of a problem, in front of something that is disturbing us. And again, there is no right or wrong here. And today I'm very careful about talking right or wrong, because when I said reset Agile or resetting Agile, I'm very, very aware of that there's a lot of people here who've been doing great work, who are probably having great stories out there and who enjoy what they're doing, right? But if I compare this situation with the situation around COVID, our discussions, debates in the face of high uncertainty, I see these extremes where people, for example, jump to conclusions. There are the one camps where people just say, you have to do this, or no, you have to do that. I don't take a position here for vaccines or no vaccines or this and that. But still, it's this expert position to immediately know what has to be done. It's this opinion-driven position. It's a position which is basically okay, but you just have to be aware, or we have to be aware of where it comes from. It comes from, being very close to the problem, not stepping back, and maybe not being able to just, think for a while, to slow down and recognize what is going on. And at the same time, we see leaders out there. I just love to point to the CEO of Novartis, who's quite a young man in his age and really capable as a leader, but also as a specialist in his field. And if you listen to him, by the way, he drives a huge business transformation at Novartis, which is after the book Unbossing. So he really brings this on board. He's really a role model. But if you listen to him about this crisis, about the pandemic, he also doesn't just shout out expertise. You recognize how he tries to balance out different perspectives, different views, a lot of insight available, but still not just saying, hey, I know. So you recognize in a given situation where the nuance lies between how people approach these topics. And, I like to compare this a lot with what we basically see and experience in the Agile space. Before we start into just a little recognition here, I want to have today's meetup with you really inclusive. Again, I don't want to, separate anyone. I don't want to show up and say, hey, Agile is crap, or what you're doing or what they are doing, and or these camps. I just want to offer a different perspective and offer an additional space for dialogue. So this is the idea, the main idea behind why I'm doing this and where my whole work is coming from. Because obviously what I'm doing today is quite different from where I was coming from and what I showed you before, where I said stereotype agilist, because I changed perspectives. And still I understand it's so important to listen to all voices. And there are many, many voices which are, as in the COVID crisis, different, but still important. And in addition, I would love all of us to challenge our status quo, to challenge our thinking in a skillful way. I'm very in love with the term skillful, because you know how we can act in different ways. And I'm not calling out the name of a certain president now, because again, that might be dangerous. But we know, how people show up, how we talk with each other, how much we listen, how much we are trying to take in and integrate different perspectives is then a matter of more or less skillful approaches. All right, so that's just for tonight's, or it's my night, it's your evening or afternoon meetup. Sort of an agenda, so just 3 small parts. And again, I would love to have a little bit of a conversation. So let's see how much I can go through these ideas and provide them. And if you have questions, I mean, just shout them out, put them in the chat, or raise your hand. Miljan might facilitate a little bit, I don't know. But again, it should be interactive. Obviously, why the argument? Why reset or shift to different perspectives with this whole agile thing? But if we do so, what is missing? So filling the blanks, coming up with a few proposals here, and also talking from my own perspectives, what I'm doing when I talk take leadership, what everybody else can do too. Maybe you do already, or let's see. So the why you read already, again, this is notes. Again, this is not a professional slide, not meant to be. It's basically my notes so that I don't forget anything at 11 o'clock in the evening. You read it probably already in the invitation. Agile is now 20, 30 years old. If you look back, there's, probably in the 90s, a lot of history, probably a lot of celebration. And at the same time, probably also a lot of frustration, which I recently pointed out to Alistair Coburn. I think Dan read the thread. And I was pretty aware of that this was hard to take in for somebody who did such a great work in the 90s, and then, crafting the Agile Manifesto, writing this, and becoming aware of, hey, truly, we changed something because the word Agile is now everywhere. But that's also a side effect which might not be as good, because everything is Agile nowadays. What is it really? And so that's where I say we not have only seen a lot of good things, but also seen a lot of harm. What do I mean by harm? If we enter an agile transformation in a big company and it fails, this is something we cannot undo. This is not where there's a CMD set thing on your keyboard and then everybody starts from scratch again, or everybody says, no problem, no worries, it was okay, 1, 2, 3 years of work, it's all right, don't worry, I'm happy. You changed a lot of things. You changed positions. You changed the way how people work together. You maybe enforced people to do certain things they would have not chosen from. Or you might have even gotten rid of people. You might have ruined their careers at certain points, or at least the idea of a career. And if you do that multiple times, and I know I'm aware of companies, and you might be too, like, for example, Barclays is quite famous for that. I think they tried it 5 or 6 times in the meanwhile, really bigger transformations. And there are talks out there about this, recorded talks about this approach. Then you can imagine that this led to a lot of frustration, but really, really hard. So what we obviously experience with this term, as I referring here to Dan, agile industrial complex, I think we're inside a machine of pushing certain ideas into organizations with maybe good intent, maybe sometimes not so good intent, where we might not be aware of anymore. And remember the awareness thing from before, what we are actually doing. I am not aware of any other community which is only looking after framework after framework after framework to get something solved, as if Agile was the problem, as if frameworks were the problem, or let's say the solution. I don't think so. They are the solution as such. So just giving you the idea, if I go into an organization, approach a team and say, hey, we do Scrum now, my first idea is not to say, hey, let's do a training, then install the roles, and then you're going to go follow me. That's the least useful approach, I would say. I think the first thing would be to say, hey, let's get together with some people, see how we can approach them, see how we can get into a conversation, a useful, skillful conversation, and then try to investigate what is actually the problem here. What do they see as an issue, or probably multiple issues, probably also a lot of strengths here. And then let them explore to see, okay, what are we going to do about this? What can we do together about this? Who could help us? Who would we go for help? And then potentially offering them maybe one or more ideas of a framework to draw from, and then think about, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's look into it. Let's, investigate. And then, okay, if this is something for us, if we feel this is an opportunity, and I'm talking opportunity here, and now pointing to Dan again, this is a choice, then the choice will lead potentially to pulling in this thing and then saying, hey, let's make it ours. Let's design our feedback loops. Let's design the way how we fulfill roles, how we collaborate. What are we going to do first, second, and third, and so on and so forth. Training will then potentially part of it, but it will not be force and tell. And again, I'm just talking about a Scrum team here, which is about a few people. And then comes bigger things, right? Yeah.
So Mike, just to go back then to the question that you kind of posed, yes, or at the beginning, which is, as consultants, right, as trainers, as people that help leaders, how much have we helped contribute to this, in a sense that we promote these frameworks, we promote these, what I call recipes, but ultimately the organizations need to come up with their own recipes and their own ways to solve problems. So what is your thought on this, where people want recipes, and we make living as trainers, consultants, and coaches, or most of us do, right, on selling those recipes, where we know deep down that we need to help organizations become better chefs rather than just provide their cooks with recipes.
Right, right. Awesome question. And I was just thinking, maybe I have an easier time answering it now after all these lockdowns and major changes than I would have had 1 year ago. For example, all we trainers, coaches, whatever we call ourselves, or facilitators or consultants, doesn't matter. We had to change a lot over the past weeks and months. We were forced with. Some of us stayed in business the way it was before. Some of my colleagues were on the same transformation initiatives like before. They were just doing it from their home office. But we were able to shift into a different direction and offer things in different ways, and maybe didn't push it anymore as such, but offered it, for example, just as an example, in little micro session learning opportunities to say, hey, we're not going to do the 2 days anymore, 16 hours in a row, or maybe 3 days in a row where it's, hardly digestible, but hey, let's ask the people. Here's 16 opportunities. What do you want to hear tomorrow? What do you want to look into? Same for people. Probably during these disruptive times, most people recognize this is maybe our least important problem. To now enforce a specific framework. Of course, there was a difference in organizations between, and that's why I mentioned it before, let's say, reacting and responding. I mean, I'm not a native speaker, but if you're a native speaker, I think it's pretty obvious. We all react to certain things under certain threats and conditions. Responding is something that takes deliberate practice to get used to challenges. That's not easy. It's like, becoming better at sports or just doing something in the field, so that you basically can step back and actually recognize, why are we doing that? So the why is the main driver then. I don't, that's the point. I wouldn't accuse anyone. I know there are these war stories about when Ken Schwaber, jumped up and said, "Hey, I'm going to run a Scrum class." I heard once Uncle Bob Martin, saying that he approached him and said, "I want to rent your office. Could I do it for this purpose? I would love to run a certified Scrum Master class." And Bob looked at him and said, "That's what he at least told." What? Who's that for? Yeah, good idea. Let me do it. So it was, that was something at a point in time where I think people were driven by passion and ideas more from an entrepreneurial point of view, when things were really small in comparison, really small, at a point in time where nobody would have thought that at one point in time there would be 1.5 million certified whatever masters from the one or the other and the other camp.
So what you're saying, it's kind of part
amazing,
of
right?
natural growth. You're saying there's no finger pointing, but it seems like we're at the time where some type of shift is needed.
I'm not sure if we in this whole development potentially, and that's a point I want to come to, we're maybe missing an element which would have offered some counterbalance, right? To say, not just say, "Hey, this is successful, let's grow it further, let's get faster at it, let's get more in and more and more and more." Like this, product development curve, the Rogers curve, to say you've got this, come from the early adopters and early maturity, late maturity, and all these things, and it just grows. We might have missed in this whole development a reflection mechanism, which, for example, might have opened up for others, other communities, other perspectives, to hold a mirror in front of us, right? For example, by the way, I've never been to the Agile conference. I think I can't count the years I've wanted to. And again, it's not happening. It didn't happen this year. But going to the Agile conference, probably, which is the biggest in the world, is probably the least where you would find a mirror to look into, or have any time to stop and say, "Hey, just a moment. What are we doing here?" Because one method, one framework, one practice, and one great practitioner is following the other. I think it's really hard in hindsight. Again, I'm really here with Dave Snowden, how he always points to say we're always clever in hindsight. But that's maybe a point. That's what I'm doing today. I try to look for alternative solutions, for alternative inspiration, for other perspectives in other camps. Yeah. So as much as I love Agile communities, and I pointed it out before, and as I am still engaging in Agile communities, I try to inform myself, to learn, to talk with other people in other areas. And I can only tell you, this is really fruitful. It suddenly feels like, hey, I'm standing next to me and looking at myself and just seeing more. It is this thing, step a little bit back, maybe start listening a little bit more, and start sensing more signals, which otherwise you might not if you're in the middle of, doing, as Stephen Perry calls busy, bang, bang.
But what about, like, if we put ourselves in a situation like of a lot of leaders where they bring in consultants and they also know that they have a short time window, because essentially they bring their own teams and they're trying to make a change in organization, and they're trying to make changes quickly without time to reflect or even say, let's try this and be open-minded. And right. I mean, this is kind of open, not just to you, Mike, but maybe others if they want to jump in. Right. It's like this pressure that most leaders feel who are driving these transformations in organizations. They don't have time for what you're saying is to reflect and say, hey, is SAFe or Scrum or Kanban or whatever method the right approach here and right for these teams versus others. It's like just we have to do it, make it work, but no time to inspect and adapt.
Yeah, I'm really happy. If anybody else wants to raise their voice and just jump in here, and please feel free to add what you're thinking about, or put it into the comments window. I have an opinion about it, and I feel, I mean, this is a very complex thing, obviously. So if we talk about leaders in certain situations under pressure, in large organizations, being part of a culture, being part of a leadership system, of a whole system as such, where I come from with my career, it's not as simple, just standing up and saying, hey, today I change everything. Today I changed my life. Again, this is part of a personal development, which doesn't happen overnight, which happens over a longer period. And I think, Miljan, I think you've been attending Pete Barron's Agile Leadership Training Program recently. At least I saw you there. I'm collaborating with Pete on his guides team, and we use this leadership agility model from Bill Joyner. Most people might know it. I think I have a slide here, by the way. We'll pull it out here.
Yeah, we had Bill Joyner at one of the Agile conferences. He's from Boston. Some of you might know him.
Yeah. So for those who don't, or at least don't know his work, here's the book, Leadership Agility. And he builds upon work of others like Bill Torbert, Keegan. It's all about stage development. It's about how adults, how human beings typically develop further. Dan, you've got a comment.
Yeah, I got a quick question. I know about Bill Torbert. He lives in my region, but a lot of people don't understand the enormous contributions he's made, and in particular, him being the foundation and root of the so-called liberating structures. Could you just tell the folks a little bit about Bill so they understand where he's coming? His enormous contributions to our work.
Well, I know more about Bill Joyner, to be honest, and the roots he builds his work on. Maybe you want to add. I just read, I think, one of Bill's book in my vacation time, Action Inquiry. But again, I'm not familiar with his personal development. You might add more here. But again, this is, I think, what is so helpful here to understand human beings beyond, just saying either you're good or bad, either you're an agile leader or an asshole, either you're doing this or that. It's more like, what does it mean to be capable of moving into this competency area? In this case, it's called catalyst. And again, this is not the exact same notation as Bill Torbert uses it. I think he uses something like alchemist, or there's a little bit of different, but similar. He uses the expert and achiever too. Let's say position, or call it perspective. It's not a mindset thing. Don't mix this up. It's not this thing again, either you're good or bad. It's really this, in order to become a catalyst, compare it with Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, where some people might compare him to a catalyst leader, different to his predecessor, Steve Ballmer. I love to use this example. It's a very simplified version, by the way, who might be, or might have been, more of the achiever. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean an achiever is a bad leader. Not at all. It is somebody who grew even beyond a smaller scope of, for example, responsibility or focus, gets beyond task focus towards really outcome and achievement, starts integrating.
Yeah. So it's really about motivations and ego, right? So if you go from expert to catalyst, it's how do you perceive those environments? I think, Mike, you started with that picture of a boy falling off the bike, and how do we perceive that? So each of these perspectives is different, and they're all correct in their own way.
Right. Now, just here's Mark wants to add something. Just to finish this idea up, Satya Nadella went through heavy personal challenges. For those who know his biography, you know, he's got a very handicapped son. And when he became aware of that their first kid would be really suffering from a challenge, he had a very hard time to get around this, a very long and hard time. And in addition, so he went through personal development. This is not about professional development. This is about being a whole human being. A catalyst in this model, again, it's just a model, right, is acting or, you know, growing in awareness from the position of a human system. So I'm not anymore only looking at outcome, achievement, but I'm looking beyond. This is right what probably we hear from a guy like the CEO of Novartis, you know, when we talk about the pandemic, not to say, we need to find a solution and then we'll be great for Novartis and blah, blah, blah. You have to do this. This is actually seeing the impact on humanity of this whole situation and approaching it from a leadership stance, basically being capable. And this is the interesting thing, more and more stepping back and integrating perspectives which are not aligned, which might be totally misaligned with your own position as a leader. Mark, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add an observation from my last job. I ended up moving into the role of a Scrum Master / coach. Did it in a partnership, paired with somebody else, for the leadership team in a company that was 3 or 4 years into its agile transformation, and had chosen to go down the component team's path, and was really very much in a sort of cargo cult Scrum kind of a mode where the ceremonies were happening, but the basic mindset was not in place. And it's really easy to get frustrated with the leaders in that situation for maintaining an environment where the teams really didn't have any freedom to continuously improve or change anything that they were doing. And it took a while with the leaders to realize that we have, as coaches, we have this problem that the leadership team is living in the same culture as all the other teams and facing the same, perhaps self-imposed, but the same constraints. And even the full-time coaches are stuck in that same environment. So if you have low psychological safety environment, it's low psychological safety for everybody. It's high risk to innovate, no matter who you are.
Right.
And what I kind of came around to is, okay, so leaders go first. Yeah, we're trying to get them to lead in an appropriate way, but servant leaders go first. And you need to, one thing that strikes me that I've experimented some with, I want to experiment more, is just starting to behave, not trying to convince someone else to behave differently, but just starting to behave differently yourself. So putting a lot of attention on outcomes and on incremental outcomes and the rate of finished things happening, and making that very public, personally doing that, and seeing who comes out of the woodwork to join you. Or a similar possibility to looking at outcomes is, there was another one I wanted to mention. Oh, darn. It'll come to me later. But just starting to behave agilely yourself, that can be a really scary thing to do. But at least now it's there, you know. Another one is to bring the customer into the room. If the company's not in the habit of bringing the customer in the room, maybe you start talking to customers. But you owe it to people to expose them to these things firsthand before you ask them to, in this very scary situation, change their behavior.
Right. So you're pointing out to a very important thing here. This model is not only made for formal leaders. Leadership in this case is about influence. It's about the question how I can interact with others inside a system to achieve not only my goal, but something beyond. So this is perfect also for any coach. And what you just mentioned, if you're really on the coach path or Scrum Master or anything alike path, it's the same challenge, awareness. Who am I? How are others, you know, impacting me and my thinking, but vice versa. How is my behavior? How do I show up, and how is my behavior impacting the system, other people? What is triggering me? These are really deep things. What is actually, make me somehow go wild or angry or acting in a certain way? So this is an opportunity to practice. And again, here is two other models, and I'm throwing around a few things here now. Let me just see where this was. It was about filling in the blanks, because I believe this whole agile coaching thing is still an interesting one. We had Lisa Atkins, by the way, in our meetup tonight. Finally, we didn't end up with clarifying what agile coaching is today, but I come more and more to the conclusion that the most missing part is professional coaching. Not so much agile knowledge, not so much, maybe even not facilitation, although it can help. Although I would say in a self-organized structure, I would love to have others take over facilitation. So I don't want to become a facilitator and take this process over. And I hardly want to teach repeatable stuff, although, well, yeah, in certain areas doing that. But for example, I believe that all of our, most of our agile frameworks practices as such are not rocket science, right? So if I make this available to people and people want it, this was the key from before, they would probably pick it up and just, dive into it, ask a few questions, get it clarified, rather hands-on than in a classroom and everything alike. But what is the most important challenge across the whole thing, in one team, in multiple teams, inside a whole organization, is all about people. People, if you like, psychology, sociology, and all these things. So I believe these are the competences we're not only missing very often, but we can improve a lot. And so this is why I said here, or made a note for me, this picture where somebody's, under the lantern, under the light, searching for something. The police guy comes by. There's a guy on the floor here. What are you searching for? My keys, my car keys. Where did you lose it? Over there. So why do you search here? Because here it's light. This is like, for me, a little bit of the agile thing. We're always searching for the next framework, practice, and everything alike, instead of saying, how could we become more aware of the organizational system, the people, how they interact with, the human system dynamics, as I put it here. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so how much does it have to do with what's easiest thing? So looking under the light is the easy
how
thing
much
to do.
Sorry, didn't get it. To do with what?
How much do we tend to go towards the easiest thing to do? So like, for instance, if we just, looking under the light, in a sense, coming back to your original question, or the idea of Agile Manifesto is all about behavior. It's all about, changing our way that we look at our perspectives, as you said. Yet over the last 20 years, we focused so much on practices and frameworks rather than changing the people stuff that you mentioned.
My opinion, again, it's opinions here. Yeah. I don't feel we are searching for the easiest stuff. I wouldn't interpret it this way. But again, we get lost. I think we get easily drawn in if we don't step back and, for example, shut up for a while and just say, what does this mean, what I just recognized? I immediately jump in and say, oh, wonderful. I mean, liberating structures is a great thing, right? Dan put it here. Although it's a collection of very, very rich fields on its own. It's just a typical Agile-alike thing. I mean, it's not coming directly from Agile as far as I know, but it's immediately picked up like 100 other tools and techniques. Sometimes I'm making jokes about OKRs, by the way, because I see OKR masters now, and OKR is really no rocket science. It's really, I mean, it's not about this thing. It's obviously about, hey, how can we align on something to go for? Some purpose, objective, and everything. It's not this framework. But if we are into this, and if we are experts in this field, and this is maybe now the expert position as a leader, we're easy, grab into the shelf and are just happy to offer something because we hope or believe this must work. At the same time, I want to go here because you mentioned it, and I recently put this out in a blog post. If I look at the Agile Manifesto, there's no You just shut me off. Maybe it was because of the Agile Manifesto. Not checking. But
that was my fault. Instead of
no, joking. It's just a joke.
You.
I'll fight for my voice. But here is an important observation. It's an observation of mine. You don't have to share it. It doesn't talk a lot about the essence of people. It talks about a lot of things. Of course, the principles talk more about it. But there's, first of all, there's individuals and interactions, which turn probably the other way around. So if we look today, there is way more processes and tools than individuals and interactions. If you would approach the situation I mentioned before with a little team, a whole organization, individuals' interactions might be the one thing and the rest you can put into your shelf for a while. But I go even further. I mentioned ORSC for as an example. I think a system is way more than individuals and interactions, because individuals' interactions for me sounds like a more of an engineering way of looking at people, right? To say, here's people, I can draw a graph around people and I can analyze it and engineer it and what else. No, this is dynamics, which I cannot predict. This is complexity at work. This is an entity on its own. That's why we talk about culture, right? Culture is not just individuals and some interactions. But anyway, I forgive these colleagues of us who did such a great work. And my belief is the Agile Manifesto, as great as it is, it doesn't offer any insight on what it is talking about, major change. And I didn't see a lot of this. I see some things, and we have something in our communities, but I didn't see a lot of things in focus on these topics. And at the same time, they didn't actually claim for that, because if we read the text, it just says, we are uncovering better ways, we, not you. And we are doing it. It's not just saying, hey, we're telling you. It's not a consultant coming around the corner and saying, I heard about it. I was just in a training session and I think you should do that. No, we are doing it. We experienced it. And now we offer help.
And it helping others, right. Helping others do it. Right.
Right. So there's a lot of probably potential around this to go deeper in this. But we also know, and that's why I call it filling the blanks here, that Agile, which is very often attached to the Agile Manifesto, and some even would say, well, and you can replace it with Scrum because Scrum, is the biggest thing in the community or in the market and so on. That is simplification. It's dangerous, and it leads to what you asked for, Milian, I believe. But there is a way out, right? And there are potentials to look at these system dynamics. There is a way out to look at yourself. I think these are the two things. First, to look at yourself as a coach, as a leader. How can we offer others these potential for gaining more clarity on how we work as individuals? And at the same time, and this is a specific concept, you don't need to buy this, there are tons of thousands of other schools of thought here. This is coming from the area where I'm just coming from, ORSC, deep democracy, but I like it very much because it's a very simple exercise. You don't even need to be an ORSC coach for it. To say, for me, it is basically what, because Dan is into open space. It is more or less open space in action. It's not looking after, let's say, the structures, but it is like, we want to invite all voices to be heard, specifically those which are usually marginalized, those which are not popular, those who might say, I hate Agile, or I fear Agile, or I don't even know what you're after. These are the voices we want to invite. And here's an activity. It's a meta skill, but it's also a workshop where you can basically put some papers out on a big floor in a room with some statements you might have gathered from people in the organization. Mm-hmm. There might be a lot of blank sheets, and people are then invited during this workshop to take a position, from this voice of the system, and feel how this feels. Take a stance and then explore new perspectives. So this is actually bringing the meat to the bone here.
So essentially you're forcing or creating a space for people to empathize with different perspectives.
Hey, right. Hey, Mike,
please.
You used a word there that I wanted to sort of hit on. Dan Mezek's mentioned it in previous venues, but the invitation, how important that is. A lot of, I think Mark had mentioned sort of the low psychological safety environment. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've noticed, when you have the ability to invite someone in and they come voluntarily, those are the best and most rewarding and honestly most resilient results or outcomes. You have true supporters and believers when you're able to do that. And I just wanted to mention, since you mentioned invitation, it's really important.
Right. And this is a great comment, Tim. Also, if you would apply such an approach, and by the way, here's Armin Mendel, whose work is actually feeding the whole ORSC program. So if somebody goes for ORSC coaching, they are building most of their knowledge on Armin Mendel's work, which is known for these terms, deep democracy or world work, which is basically, by the way, going beyond a local, some organization, but connecting way more within a global economy or society and everything else. And where we would also have a stance as coach, that we would really say, hey, there is an agenda, there is something some rules, some principles we follow. It's like no secrets, for example. Or we work with the system, and it's not about personal opinions. It's not about single individual voices. It's every voice here we see and hear and somebody takes is as part of a whole system. And this is obviously the system we want to look after to improve, to become a better workplace, or to become more effective, or what else, right? What all we have in our Agile agenda. So this is one thing. And the other thing, another one which comes from the same approach, is the edge theory, which is a very nice metaphor I love for change. And this is, the edge here is like a horizon, right? You can take this like a mountain, and you're in front of the mountain, you have a certain position. And depending upon your position, your perspective, your awareness, you might talk about what is currently present inside yourself, what I'm currently aware of, what I'm talking about, what I believe. Some people might become aware of more, of something else. Some people might move over this horizon. They might become aware of a secondary, first of all, where they say something is triggering us, that Agile is going other directions, right? We don't know yet. Nobody knows what's happening in the next 5-10 years. But some of us already sensing there is more to come. There are more connections maybe with other communities. It's going further. The whole pandemic, which we just experienced, tells us lessons in certain directions where some already crossed further and are now acting from a different position. They are now acting from the secondary. So for them, the secondary becomes their primary. The problem is others are still on the other side of the mountain. It's not a problem, it's just a fact. And we need to recognize that change, in a way, in a complex organization happens this way, that everybody has their own edges, that everybody has their own pace. Some people are further, some people are a little bit slower. And now is the challenge here, again, back to Tim. How can we make it possible for others who are still in the primary to see other opportunities? To maybe, as we call it in the ORSC way, kiss them over the edge. It's a nice frame here. It basically means we don't tell them, we don't force them. We offer them opportunities. We might take them over for 10 minutes and just show them. See, I want to help you to explore what's going on here. But again, you can go back, no worries. You don't have to stay here. If it feels uncomfortable, go away immediately. This is a wonderful metaphor we use in this space, in this coaching space, to deal again with this whole challenge of change from an organizational perspective and from a stance of deep democracy. And again, why are we doing this? It's not for another fancy tool. It is about nurturing the soil, the field. For everything else, we might have been taken too prematurely, or talked about too prematurely, to follow after, to then invite people for themselves to consider, yeah, this way of working differently, or call it better, collaborating. We don't even need to work differently. We just get closer to each other. We face some uncertainties in different ways. And also offer opportunities in the same way, becomes now suddenly an option. So this is what I call a blank here, which we can fill. And there are probably tons of other activities and tons of other, I mean, Dan pointed it out here, liberating structures offers you tons of advice or wisdom you can draw from. But this is one of them, and just from practice. For example, I'm working with people in the Agile HR space, or HR space, which I, by the way, call human relationship management, not human resource management anymore. And of course, I see people who are progressive, who even talk not about this age thing per se anymore, who just say, hey, I'm here just a servant, leader, or I'm a leader, I'm a catalyst, whatever. But there are different perspectives. And I don't go in here and say, you know, HR people, you're basically passing away, so you've got 5 years left. Now you either follow me or you're dead. You're dead. No, I will have these types of workshops where I invite people for different perspectives. The result usually in such an approach was fruitful. People start understanding each other. They approach each other from different perspectives. They suddenly recognize, hey, you know, I'm valued. I'm still valued, and I have an opportunity. I'm able to listen in. I have a possibility to learn something new. It's a totally different stance. It opens totally different opportunities. Right. So, adding to what we already said about Bill Torbert and the Bill Joyner model and stage development, this is a way Michael Hammond basically drew in his book Evolve Agility, where he refers to this work, and I like it very much. This, you know, 2 axes, how we develop as human beings. We can look at the horizontal scale and think this is where we are good in Agile. Additional skills, methods, practices. We learn, we take in. But it doesn't make a difference as long as we don't really take it in, when it then suddenly clashes with our beliefs and means, well, what does it mean in Scrum? What are they doing? And what does it mean for me? That suddenly creates a cognitive dissonance. And this cognitive dissonance is an opportunity to move further in development on the vertical axis. The vertical axis is personal development. It's basically moving on the scale from expert to achiever to catalyst, becoming more of this. It's creating more awareness. It's the capability of making sense of what you learned in terms of frameworks, tools, practices. They suddenly make have a different meaning. And so both inform each other. So I learned something new. It gets in conflict with what I believe. And now it's really up to me or my practice how I learn, not only facts, but as a human. And at the same time, when I move further, and that takes also time, by the way, then I suddenly look differently into those practices, into Agile or anything we have here, right? So this is actually a very important thing. And how do you do that? Well, to share what I do and what you can do too, you need feedback from various perspectives. You need to give yourself feedback. So for example, everybody here is probably journaling, right? Every day in the morning, every day in the evening, you take aside some minutes, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, your time before breakfast, I don't know, after a dinner, look into yourself, into your day with a few predefined questions or free form. I use predefined questions where just look into who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? What's my intent? I have here a few of those. What are the habits I'm currently looking after where I'm challenged to move further on this axis on a vertical scale? What am I grateful for? Whom do I want to connect today? All these questions are really helping you if you take this as a frame to start the day differently, more consciously, become a more conscious person. Because from this position on, you will potentially act differently. And in the evening, you will potentially reflect on it. What happened during the day? How did your intent pay off? And what did you learn? You have to make some of those habits yours. And of course, it's helpful to have a coach, a mentor, supervision, and everything you know for this to become workable. You need to work on your own leadership agility. Well, you need to. You first need to decide if you want to. What do you want? It's a very important point in my life. At some point, I recognized, yeah, making money in this agile space is comfortable. It seems to be a pretty space to earn money, but it's not what I want alone. It is something I need. It's something I have to have, but I want something more. And when I recognized this, I could step back and say, well, from now on, I can, first of all, take more time for myself and my family. At the same time, I can differentiate what kind of client engagements I would prefer over others. Because I might just say, no, I don't want to maximize revenue or my money. And that gives you actually a framework and a baseline. I would also heavily recommend most of you, if you haven't done it yet, one of those profound coaching educations. For example, I'm just mentioning ORS. Any of those educations, it's not learning basically primarily tools or how to do the process, which is a very important skill. But first of all, you look into the mirror over about 1 or 2 years, into the mirror. It's really learning about yourself. It's really expanding yourself, right? And here is an interesting one, because I mentioned it before, and it comes already close to what I want to provide here. Maybe we can have a little bit of more conversations. Because I mentioned I look more and more into other spaces, and I recognize that Agile becomes a sort of replaceable word for everything. I consciously invite customers, clients, teams to make it a working agreement. We're not going to use this word. You know, anybody might pay €5 when they use it, to put it into a piggy bank. But just to become more clear what we mean. What do you mean by agile way of whatever framework and estimating, or what else? What are we trying to achieve here? It helps to become more conscious about what we do, why we do, and how we do things. So what I see, to conclude a little bit, I believe we're currently in a transition. I mentioned COVID, I mentioned our social and, well, global social challenges. Our whole societies are somehow challenged. And Agile has become a sort of, a quick fix solution thing. And finally, I believe it is not the first place to look after. When things are going wrong inside organizations, I think it's not the first thing to draw from a framework and say, yeah, I know how we can, reduce cycle time. Because why was it not there before? Because we didn't have a framework? No, I didn't think so. These people are intelligent, but there's friction in multiple areas. It's not as simple to go from, A to B. There's a lot of opportunity to gain insight. Who do we want to be as an organization, and what would that mean? And I feel and sense, and that's what we see already, right? Because Agile is used in many other areas where people even don't know where it comes from, that we can connect way more communities here who have to offer additional perspectives, specifically from a human dimension, human system dynamics dimension, so that we can actually be more effective with what we try to do. And again, I didn't want to shout out anything here. I just wanted to offer different perspectives, because I can imagine that everybody of you is super successful, right? I'd be happy to have some views from your side, some maybe insights. Dan put a lot of stuff here into the chat, which I have to save. I can't read it currently, but I think we need to go.
We do have afterwards. A couple of questions, Mike.
Right.
One was earlier from Lisa on shouldn't stakeholders trust their Scrum Masters and Agile coaches to guide each team toward what makes the most sense for their needs? For instance, Scrum, Kanban, etc. So it's about trust. And also a second question is related to trust, is how do you hold the conversation invite folks into the conversation without taking the time to build trust, especially as organizations are looking for rapid solutions.
Hmm.
So
Let's
both
look at the
questions,
first one. Let's look at the first one, and I'd be happy to have a dialogue here. I just offer one idea for the first question. To me, it still sounds like the traditional old agency model, like saying, "Hey, we need something. You take the order, and okay, trust people to get stuff done." I'm missing here this dialogue, what I mentioned before with this deep democracy process, what we mean by stakeholder, what kind of stake, what kind of skin in the game, what kind of involvement, who really needs what from whom, or I love to talk about who's missing what from whom and why, what are the missed expectations. So yeah, sure, they should trust. But what helps to basically build trust and again move out the frameworks? I think trust is something we grow by showing vulnerability, right? I think it's this thing where we shake hands, right? Where we demonstrate the other that we have our weapon down on the ground, and we show up in a way where we're partially vulnerable. Trust I cannot switch on. I have to build it, let's say feed it. I don't know, build it, but feed it, nurture it by coherent behavior. And doing this just via order-taking mechanisms, I mean, it is something that somehow works. We know that as customers from certain companies somehow, right? I can trust some companies more than others, or I do, or do more or less. But I believe in a social system, there are more skillful ways to approach this. And I think this goes way beyond this order-taking mechanism. Not sure if there are other opinions here. On this
please
question.
jump in. Yeah, we have about 5-10 more minutes, 5 really, but we can extend it maybe a couple more minutes. So, yeah, and one of the things is like, you know, I tell at least leaders that I work with that, you know, without trust, forget about everything that you do. So if they're, if everybody or most people are not committed to building that trust, then doesn't matter what you try, ultimately it has very high risk of just falling apart. So
yeah, and that's the point, as you just say, they are not committed. What is the problem here actually? What does it mean people are not committed? What is the actual source of this problem? What should we look after here? Is it about a framework? I don't think so. I know frameworks can help to create a machine that looks very trustworthy, but it's a little bit of a hen-egg thing here, right? Mm-hmm. And if people are not committed to something, there's something we can have a great dialogue about. And that's where I say a framework would be my least problem at this point. Agile would be my least problem at this point. And it takes time to have these conversations, because you have this other question where it said, okay, how can we hold the conversation, invite folks into the conversation without taking the time to build trust, especially as organizations are looking for rapid solutions. Now, this is what we had with this. I think, Milan, you already asked it somehow. What about these busy C-level members? You know, we're pushed on the market. That's where I believe there is the difference between true leaders, where some have the luck to work with people who are more reflected than others, and basically have this sort of influence on their organization. I always love to talk about the glass ceiling. So the leadership determines a lot what is possible for the rest of the organization. If we have a toxic type of leadership, which is only after a certain, you know, thing like achievement, numbers, this is an unbalanced culture. it's important to achieve, it's important to, you know, make profits and what else we need for feeding our collaborative being, but we cannot trade one for the other. And the awareness of leadership will draw the balance of organizational culture, or the intent to do so. Again, I at least the first part of Satya Nadella's book, the second part it becomes a little bit boring, but the first part is a little bit inspiring, where he just talks about how he stepped into this role. Yeah. And God knows, I think he had a lot of, let's say, fear and not knowing what should I focus on. And then he was really, you know, really bold and holding a mirror in front of the organization. And this way, actually surprising everyone, and at the same time calling out for action, inviting people to follow. Amazing story. But this needs a personality which everybody can work upon. You can do that, and you can influence your team members, you can influence your colleagues, you can influence even your boss probably, but not by telling, but by working on your own stance and acting from a stance where you actually truly show up a behavior which others can just, you know, recognize. So there is no miracle here, right? It's hard work. It's probably the hardest work because it means we have to recognize something which is so hard. It's like, I have to recognize I have no hair. It's easy to do, right? But I might refuse. I might say, no, come on, no, I don't see that. You have to look into the mirror. Yeah.
Or even, you know, a lot of times it's about letting go of your beliefs, or not just recognizing, but being able to suspend whatever you believe in, and helping others being able to suspend what they believe in, and just consider, hey, you know, what is Mike saying? What is Dan saying?
Right.
What about, and it goes back to what you said about going and showing the other side, and just saying, hey, you know, if you could suspend your beliefs for 5 minutes and put yourself in this situation, a lot of times that can be eye-opening for other people.
Right. And there's a really simple trick. You might have heard it on our ALJ workshops, where we always recommend to everyone and say, if something comes out because of your beliefs, something you want to say, maybe keep it for a moment and write it down. Start writing down more than you're talking, because that gives you the opportunity to still let it there. Maybe even think about it, maybe pick it up tomorrow. And at the same time, you give somebody else space to talk more than you would have squeezed in and just moved forward. So basically teaching yourself to take perspectives in and not immediately put your stuff at the table and basically take too much space, right? All right.
So yeah, we're at time. We can, you know, stick around maybe for 5 more minutes, or, you know, if people have questions, or just any question, I guess we'll open it up.
I would love to hear from the group here what they are up to. It's less about questions, but just opinions and how you're going, how you're approaching next year. 20 years Agile. So is that important for us? Is that something you want to celebrate? Is it something where you maybe think, I'm going to work differently in my organization or with my clients, or is COVID triggering something, you know, the remote work? What's happening? I'd be curious. If not, there's still a full day ahead in most people's time zones to do something. Again, I believe it's an amazing time now. It's I always keep comparing what I experience in this COVID crisis situation, and these extreme positions and extreme things which are happening out there, terrible things, by the way, and try to reflect a little bit on, it's easier in the Agile space, but still to say, hey, it's also very important what we do here, and it can be harmful. Just to draw this comparison and say, see, what's the difference between having these extreme positions where people start fighting on Facebook against each other that this and that is bullshit and wrong and I don't know, versus having an educated conversation, 5 people at a table and 10 different opinions. They don't like each other, but they listen. They enable a culture for listening and building upon each other's argument. And then suddenly you have these magic moments where somebody just, you know, builds up on really somebody else's, creates something new, and something moves forward. Mm-hmm. I think this is the opportunity we have in the Agile space, being less dogmatic, being more insightful in terms of what humans need, what systems need as such.
Yeah. A couple of comments.
Pointing fingers. Mike. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So just quickly here, but James Moore says, you know, I found at my organization that word agile is a dirty word. They just don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is I would say that I want to help one team at a time and build on their success to demonstrate change. Yeah,
right.
It's possible. Yeah. Lisa said COVID is getting organizations to look at interactions, that they're not face-to-face, and find ways to make them as valuable and effective as possible. I'm seeing that too. So those are some of the comments and things that I can compare. At least what I'm seeing as well. What about you, Mike?
That sounds all amazing. And I can only say I would love to connect with you sometimes physically, and any other opportunity. Let's see where this goes.
Next time we're not sure where we have the Agile Maine day, but probably not this year. We'll have next year. So
it has to change again. We'll have a lot of online conferences in the near future. Probably another year or so to go. And again, I think this is the opportunity to move society dramatically forward. And I think we can contribute to this.
Can I make a statement about that?
Yeah, please.
I completely join you in that idea. And I think that the people here on this call and the others who will read the transcript or watch the video, and the whole Agile world has an enormous epic level opportunity right under our noses to make a significant impact in the world that's tremendously positive. But we're not going to do it with the norms that we're currently tolerating. We're going to have to call out the bullshit, because real Agile is profoundly awkward. It identifies the truth and then puts it on the table, and then everyone just looks at it in an awkward moment of silence. We need to get there. A lot of what you've taught tonight helps tremendously, in my opinion, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I'll agree.
Thank
There's
you, Dan.
huge opportunity in all this too. I would tend to agree, absolutely, especially when you talk about interactions and the quality of interactions and navigating complexity in an uncertain world. Huge opportunities there as Agilists to help make a big dent in the universe here.
Right.
And we need that in this world right now, where the level of civil discourse is so freaking low that any improvement from zero is infinite. You know what I mean?
It will involve some action, and we're going to get into, there will be, There's definitely a polarized points of view on some of this, but I actually think that is a big opportunity for Agilists to take up.
People like Michael, people like the Agile people at Agile Maine are at the cutting edge of something that wants to happen. That's my opinion.
Great. Well, thank you all. Mike, any final words before we
Yeah.
here?
Well, I hope something landed here for you and some of you. I'm happy for any follow-up conversation. If you want to connect, you've got my connection data, social media. Happy to get into any conversation. But for now, I just wish you the possibility to gain insight, more insight into your own perspectives and work, success with what you're doing, especially success with what others are hoping for, whom you work with. And yeah, I'd love to see our work crossing each other's impact somewhere in this space. Let's see. Especially, I wish all of you health, stay safe. It's tough times, but I think we're going to go through this and somehow make it. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And thanks for having me. Yeah. Thanks, Milan, for organizing this. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dave, for co-hosting.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for staying late. I know it's past midnight your time. So thank you. And we'll post the recording on Agile Maine YouTube channel, and we'll share with the rest of the community. So thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon. And get some sleep, Mike.
Yeah, have a great remaining day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.